celebrating the power of possibility. Pilot Flying J and Halloran Hilton Hill present Anything is Possible. Today's guest, Ed Pershing, Part 1.
Welcome to another edition of Anything is Possible. It's always an honor to talk to you. These are great stories about great people whose lives prove that anything is possible. And over 300 shows, I've gotten to meet some incredible people that have inspired me to be better and to embrace the possibility of my life. And as you consider your own story, as you meet these great guests like you'll meet today, think about what you were created to do, what's possible for your life, and then go for it. I mean, that's what we're here to do. We're here to add value, and it is my great honor to welcome my friend Ed Pershing to the broadcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Halloran, for inviting me.
We were at Alcoa High School, and you were being honored, and there was this look on your face, and if I had to describe it, it would be one word. It would be wow, because I could see you thinking about where your life started and thinking about what it's become. Am I accurate in what you were feeling in that moment?
Yes, you are, but it was really honoring my family and my family history. And the wow was just thinking about the journey. And also, there was a moment, it may have been just the fear factor as well, because I had to speak after that video. And when you probably saw me, and I knew I had to speak about my younger brother. And I've never been able to do that publicly that well. And so that's what you saw in my face. It was a wow moment because it just took us back from the pictures. I'd never seen that video before.
Wow.
And so they had pictures from when, I know one of them was when my younger brother was 3 and I was 6 and my older brothers. And we were all at my grandparents' house, and I had not seen that picture in a number of years.
Tell me about growing up.
I grew up in Alcoa, Tennessee. My parents, my mom was a nurse, she was a registered nurse. My dad was a foreman on the paint line at Alcoa, where they paint the aluminum cans that we see in Coca-Cola and so forth. And growing up in that community, I say I wouldn't trade my youth with anyone, kings or princes, because it was just a great area to grow up in. I have 2 older brothers and a younger brother. Older brother 7 years older than me, Jim. My older brother Steve is 4 years older than me, and my younger brother Dennis, better known as Mr. P, was 2.5 years younger than me.
Tell me about Mr. P.
Now this could get tough, Halloran. You're going. Mr. P, my younger brother was quite an individual. He's actually the most remarkable person I've met as I watched his life evolve. At the age of 21, he was in his senior year at UT in education, wanted to be a high school teacher. And literally one afternoon, I think it's a Thursday afternoon, a friend found him wandering in the median of the interstate, basically incoherent. Friend happened to turn around, fortunately picked him up. Turns out the friend suspected, well, I can't believe Dennis would be on drugs and so forth, and took him to a doctor. Turned out he had a major brain tumor. And that's what had triggered the symptoms. And it was a remarkable story. He had the first surgery, was over 14 hours. And basically was completely healed, even though his initial prognosis was if he lived, he'd be disabled for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, the tumor came back 3 years later. I had a second major surgery. This time there were lifelong complications to where literally he had to take medicine every day to survive. But he went on, completed his student teaching, was a teacher at Alcoa High School for almost 25 years. And the great thing about him and another friend of his, Steve Bledsoe, they founded the alternative school to help those kids most at risk that struggled. And it may be they struggled academically, it could be they struggled just because of home environment, whatever. And in starting that alternative school, he reached those kids. And the remarkable thing about Dennis was how he gave to every individual. He saw so much potential in every kid. And in that, he did whatever it took to help those kids get along. He was known for keeping food in his desk, because a lot of times kids came to school without breakfast. He was known for keeping snacks. And he went on, and he passed away, it'll be 10 years ago this December. And whenever at his funeral, there were over 2,000 people there, and a lot were turned away because there just wasn't adequate parking. And it just showed the impact of someone who literally had dedicated his life to helping kids. And a lot of those kids are now adults, and so anytime I'm in Alcoa, if somebody hears my name, or if I had a credit card to pay for something, often I get a question, "You related to Mr. P?" And he was known as Mr. P because early on one of the students could not pronounce his last name. And they started calling him Mr. P, and that became the label. And his legacy to the party, anything's possible today. There is an alternative school building in Alcoa named PAL, Pershing Academy of Learning, because he always addressed kids as pals. It was always hi, pal.
Wow.
And so it tells you anything is possible.
Wow, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to know how he impacted your life, because I know watching him affected you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a moment. My friend Ed Pershing is here. You're watching Anything is Possible. We'll be back.
Possibility powered by Pilot Flying J, Covenant Health, Home Federal, and the Knoxville News Sentinel. Coming up.
He taught kids how to fish. When he passed away and we went to his house, I found over a dozen fishing rods and reels. He'd buy a bunch of them, give them away to kids to help them learn how to fish. And it was just how he touched people.
Welcome back to Anything is Possible. This is Ed Pershing, and we were just talking about Mr. P.
Yes.
And I could feel you shifting, because there's a deep, I mean, it's your family, it's your brother, it's a deep emotional connection. But I remember when you were speaking, you were talking about him. How did he impact and affect you?
Really, the example he gave, I shared with some students recently. He never made more than $25,000 a year.
Wow.
And yet he gave kids, he taught kids how to fish. When he passed away and we went to his house, I found over a dozen fishing rods and reels. He'd buy a bunch of them, give them away to kids to help them learn how to fish. And it was just how he touched people. And the thing it really touched me most is just the fact that society oftentimes judges us based upon the appearance of success. But with him, his legacy will be everlasting.
Let's talk about your life and your career. You go to Alcoa High School. After high school, did you play sports?
I did. And I still, my love, I did not play high school basketball. We always had our chores, our paper routes and so forth, but played a lot called street ball. There was a number of us traveled around the city to play street ball, and played, I actually made a lifelong goal. A mentor of mine, one of my first mentors, he's now deceased, Fred Spencer, he had made a comment late one night after playing basketball out in the West High Gym that his lifelong goal was to play basketball in 7 decades of life. I looked at Fred and said, "Fred, do the math. You're not going to be playing when you're 70 years old." And he said, "Listen closely." He said, "The 7 decades of life, I started before I was 10. All I've got to do is make it to 60. And that night, I made a promise to Fred. I was adopting his goal as well. And so on my 60th birthday, I played basketball with a bunch of my colleagues.
That's awesome.
And so I dedicated that to Fred. He passed away here a few years ago, but it's just an example of the impact others can have on your life.
So you played sports, and then you decided to go to college. Where'd you go to school?
I went to UT. That's one thing, all four of us, my three brothers, all went to UT. So I have a great affinity for the University of Tennessee. They gave us all a pathway. My parents always made it very clear. There was no option. We were going on to school.
Right.
And whatever our interests were, that's what they were encouraging. And
what were your interests at that time?
I was, to be candid, I was struggling. I was good in math and science, and so my physics teacher encouraged me to go into engineering. And I actually enrolled in engineering, went to orientation, and at the lunch break, I realized I didn't think this was me. And I was actually, I was kind of surprised, but I got up, and a family friend and my parents had even encouraged me to think about business, but in high school, business really wasn't talked about. And so I went over to the accounting department, and the good Lord was looking after me that day, because as I was speaking to the secretary and explaining to her I was walking over from engineering, I was wondering if somebody could help me enroll in accounting, Dr. Norman Dietrich happened to be in the office and overheard it. And he was an accounting professor, ended up leading the accounting program. And he turned around and said, "Maybe I can help you." And he took me up to his office and immediately started giving me advice that has had a lifelong impact. He looked at my schedule and said, "We need to expose you to the humanities," because I had it all filled up with math and science. And for a number of years after that, I thought Dr. Dietrich was wrong. But as I grew older and gained a little more maturity and insight, I realized his advice that morning was lifelong.
Invaluable.
It was invaluable.
You know, we've talked about this before, but I've always believed that you have to dedicate yourself to a high level of skill, that you build your career on competence. But being highly skilled, if not paired with insight, which is a deep intuitive understanding of people and situations, you won't know how to apply what you know.
Exactly.
Right?
That's very true.
And I guess as you've built this business, you're in the people business.
And I didn't, when you're young, you don't grasp that, but Dr. Dietrich did. And that's very true. We're in the people business. And that's what, if surround yourself with great people, and it's not work. You know, I enjoy doing what I do.
I've had a number of people on this show, and one thing that great people share in common is that proverb that says a good name is better than gold,
Yes.
right? And I've run into so many people, when they talk about you, they say, look, if Ed Pershing is on it, I go to sleep. It's done. It's finished. They do what they say they're going to do, and they do it at a really high level. And I guess that didn't start when you started the company. That had to start as a very young man. What did you do after you graduated from the University of Tennessee? Well,
actually, it started with my parents. They always taught us your reputation's everything, your name is everything. So always make sure you do the honorable thing. After the University of Tennessee, I went to work back then it was known as Ernst & Ernst. Today it's Ernst & Young. It was one of the big 8 accounting firms. And my plan was to go on to law school. And fortunately, I was working on a project, a mineral rights acquisition on one of B. Ray Thompson coal companies. And it was a lot of legal documents, and I got to witness what the corporate attorneys were dealing with. And I realized once again that that's not what inspired me. And I was really a lost ball in high weeds, because suddenly I was 2 years into my accounting career, and I knew I wanted to do something different, but I wasn't sure what to do. And Walter Borth, the managing partner of the Knoxville office, called me in his office one day and asked if I'd be considered to be nominated to go into a program, a one-time program that the chairman of Ernst was starting to try to educate and basically develop healthcare consultants. Ray Groves saw the future, the need for healthcare advisors, business advisors. And so I was blessed. Again, the good Lord's hand was in. Everybody says, boy, you were smart to get into healthcare. I said, I had nothing, nothing to do with that choice. I was just guided, and I didn't know why. I thought, okay, you know, I'm 24 years old. It sounds like a great opportunity. And once I got there, were 18 of us from the U.S. and Europe. And the first week in class, we had to commit to a year of education and work study. And the first week in class, I just felt like, for some reason, this feels right.
What was it about what you were learning that fit who you were becoming?
The thing I was learning was the fact that the importance of bringing sound business practice and so forth to any industry. And the healthcare industry was struggling from it. It needed greater business acumen at that time. And healthcare, and this was oftentimes founded on mission of faith. You know, you look at the role of faith-based organizations in advancing healthcare, you know, community hospitals and so forth. And so there was a need for better business practices. And so I felt like, even though I'd avoided medicine, my mom was a nurse, my oldest brother's a pharmacist, my older brother's a physician. I had zero interest in medicine. I didn't feel called. I think it's a calling if you're to be really good at it. And so I found it, again, how I ended up there is just amazing, because the moment I got into the business aspects of healthcare, it just made sense. And I do feel like I was led to that because of the impact you can have, even from the business standpoint of helping advance healthcare.
So I guess what I hear you saying is just, and I don't mean this pejoratively at all, but just dry accounting, just coming in, doing an audit, explaining the numbers, maybe giving some strategy for how to, you know, manage and use resources. That's one thing. But if you step into an industry and because of your expertise, you can actually make them better.
Yes.
And the reward of helping someone build something, as opposed to just being a service provider. Do you think that's what appealed to you, was the fact that, wow, now I can use this skill to actually have impact?
Yes, that is it. You've described it very well, Halloran.
Because I'm thinking about the decision that Mr. P made. Like, I'm doing something that makes an impact. So let me get some fishing rods and teach them how to fish. Let me take my accounting expertise and show them how to build a better business so that they can serve at a much higher level.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, so what I want to do is I want to take a break here, and when we come back, I want to talk about that journey, because God put you in a position where you can learn what you need to learn for the life that you're about to live, right?
Yes.
I want to figure out how we make the leap from working for a Big 8 firm to putting your name on the door, which I know that's quite a journey.
Yes.
My guest is Ed Pershing. You're watching Anything is Possible, because it is.
Coming up.
It wasn't about the numbers. You could use numbers, you could use data, but then you could see it in action as programs are improved or new programs are started. And it really does add a mission element to it.
Thank you for being willing to talk about Mr. P. I know how much your brother means to you, and I know how much his legacy means to you. You're watching Anything is Possible. This is my guest, Ed Pershing, and we were off the air. We were just talking about your brother and about being able to talk about that, and we'll unfold that a little bit more. The Big 8 firm, Ernst & Ernst, I guess it was, it became Ernst & Young. First of all, that was a dream job back in the day. I remember when I was growing up, if I could have a suit and tie job, I thought that was the that was the thing. So you, but you get called into, yeah, maybe that way. Say it that way. You get called into a training program where they were looking at the field of accounting and how it could serve in the healthcare industry, which had great mission, but operationally, sometimes when you have organizations that are not-for-profit or non-profit, they're so mission-focused that when it comes to the practical operation side, that gets a little mushy. And so you got to learn about that, and that gave the work of accounting more purpose for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And and to be able to move into the advisory consulting role and realize you can help maybe encourage an organization to start a new program, for example, that a community needs. I remember several years back traveling to a region, and I recognized in doing some work that their cardiac program needed more resources, as an example. You could see it through the demographic data and so forth. And that's an example then of being able to provide guidance of how better care could be brought to that region, that community, through that process.
You know, now when you said better data or the use of data, it just dawned on me that when you become really good with numbers, people that are great in accounting don't see numbers. It's almost like a chess player sees chunks, right? And so you can look at financial documents and you actually see the organization.
I like to think of it, it ties into your theme. You see possibilities. What I saw there was the possibilities of better cardiac care. And so oftentimes in our work, that's one of the things I found so fulfilling about it. It wasn't about the numbers. You could use numbers, you could use data, but then you could see it in action as programs are improved or new programs are started. And it really does add a mission element to it.
When you looked at the numbers, could you see the way resources were moving in an organization and say, that's not optimal? If you take this resource flow and move it this way, given what your mission is and given the growth potential of the organization, you'll have more growth. Is that kind of the way you see the numbers?
That is, and then also being aware of what's going on in the industry. We always try to be aware of breaking technologies, new therapies, new programs, new possibilities. And so by having that, being able to combine that with our knowledge of the situation, we're oftentimes to talk about, here's possibilities.
Right.
You know, look at this as a possibility.
So now, so you're learning this, you're a young man, you're in your 20s, you're on the cutting edge of what's coming because healthcare is going to be a huge thing. But I think you possess something along with your acumen with the actual practice of accounting and business consulting. You feel trustworthy. There's nothing in this, right? But I feel safe giving you my wallet, right? You'll throw this back.
Just with an accountant.
This is catch and release, right? But you feel trustworthy. And when I was around your family that evening, I don't know how to describe it, but I know the feeling when I'm around somebody and they feel trustworthy. Do you know what I mean? I know you,
thank you.
You must know it in business. You'll walk into a room, you'll sit down at a table, and somebody will be saying all the right words, but you just don't. But then sometimes you'll meet the simplest of people, and they just emanate a trustworthy. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I think. In fact, we talk about that in our hiring process. We put technical expertise, and Laura, it's all about character and integrity, and that person's commitment to the mission and so forth that we're all about. Technical skills are a given. You've got to have that, but the most important factor is the person's character.
Where did you learn that personally? Was that because you mentioned your mother and father, and you mentioned the fact that you had chores, and you had a paper route, a work ethic. You mentioned the Pershing name, that your father said, look, your reputation, your character. What I'd like to do, explore in part 2 of our interview, a couple of things. Number one, I want to talk about building character and how it was built in you. And then I want to figure out how you moved from young rock star, Ernst & Ernst guy to starting your own practice, because you guys are all over the country, and I know that your family has to be proud, but I know that the reason that you're out there is because you love to serve. So we'll do that when we come back. Ed Pershing is my guest today. This is a 2-parter, so coming up in our second part, which you'll see on our next episode, we'll talk about how he started in Alcoa, but built a beautiful company that's built on rock solid reliability, integrity, and possibility. We'll see you next time.